We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we stand. We gather here today, this evening, on traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Before we start, I would like for all of us to turn off our cell phones, and a warm welcome to all our guests, Holocaust survivors and their families, and our partners in this event, the Azrieli Foundation. Tonight's special event is presented by the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, which is based here at Carleton University's Zelikovich Center for Jewish Studies in cooperation with the Azrieli Foundation. Now, established less than 3 years ago, the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, or CHES, is committed to transmitting the stories of the Holocaust to promote knowledge and understanding of its history and legacy. The center strives to organize thoughtful and inspirational programs about one of the worst genocides in modern history. Tonight's program, In Conversation with Jeane Beker, will be no exception. I don't know about you, but I spent extra time on my outfit today. All right. First of all, I would like to invite Mina Cohen, the director for the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, to say a few words. Mina.
As Judy mentioned, the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, CHES, was established less than 3 years ago under the umbrella of the Zelikovich Center for Jewish Studies at Carleton University, right here. In that short time, our small group of dedicated volunteers has delivered many exceptional educational programs in keeping with our mission. The center offers year-round programming whose objective include combating prejudice and racism, promote respect and diversity, social justice, and human rights. I have no doubt that tonight's program will provide new insight and inspiration towards these goals. We would like to express our appreciation and thanks to the Azrieli Foundation for their generosity and support, to Jody Spiegel, Director of Holocaust Survivors Memoir Program, for her vision, to Jeane Beker for taking the time out of your busy schedule and coming to Ottawa tonight. Let me touch on a personal reflection on Ms. Beker in the Globe and Mail, describing how her parents were adamant about telling every detail of their war experience. Quote, "I remember hiding under the bed as a small child," unquote, wrote Jeane. Quote, "I didn't want to hear any more of their war stories," unquote. Children of Holocaust survivors share many experiences, regardless where they were growing up. Reading Jeane's word immediately transported me back to my own childhood as a young child of survivors growing up in Israel at a time when TV did not exist yet. I clearly remember running to my bed and covering my head with my pillow because I could not bear to hear the stories and music broadcast on the radio on Yom HaShoah. When we were young, it was too difficult for us to hear our parents' stories. Today, we're looking for a way to share these stories. We recognize the importance of engaging with second descendants of Holocaust, the second generation or third generation, as we call them sometimes. CHES has a growing list of second and third generation members who are seeking the company of others like them, wanting to create meanings for others out of their parents' sacrifices. Today, more than ever, descendants feel the need to research and fill the gap of their family's lost history. Providing programs for descendants of Holocaust survivors is one of our major goals. As the survivors who helped us gain a better understanding of the Holocaust are aging or leaving us, they are creating a void. At the same time, their children and grandchildren are stepping up around the world. It's a phenomenon around the world, not just here in Canada. They are eager to tell their story, share their parents' and grandparents' stories in a new, artistic, and inspiring way. This is being done through conversation, literature, theater, music, film, and art. In her presentation tonight, Ms. Beker embodies this new reality. We are all looking forward to listen to you, Jeannie. Thank you.
And now I would like to invite Dr. Deidre Butler, the director of the Max and Tetsi Zelikovich Center. Zelikovich Center. I practiced that earlier too, for Jewish Studies and Associate Professor of Religion in the College of the Humanities at Carleton University. Welcome.
It is my pleasure to add my warm welcome to you all for joining us tonight, this evening. As many of you know, CHESS was founded on the determination that Ottawa needed a Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship, and the belief that there is an essential link between academic scholarship at the university and the memory of survivors and their families, and the education that needs to happen in our schools and in the community at large. The Zelikovich Center is proud to provide a home for chess and partner with Mina Cohn and the amazing committee of volunteers who do the hard work throughout the year to remember and educate. When we started, we had no funding, no endowment. We still don't. And when we began chess, we did so with the belief that we would find the means to make chess a reality. Where there's a will, there's a way. And chess is a reality because individuals like each of you supported this work, so I thank you. The work we do is strengthened by strong ties with institutions across Canada and around the world, with the diplomatic community and their embassies, with Holocaust studies programs at other universities, and with Holocaust education centers and foundations. So tonight I ask a moment to speak of the Azrieli Foundation, who partnered with us tonight in bringing Jeane Beker to speak with us, and who have been such strong allies since we began chess. The Azrieli Foundation was inspired by Jewish values and the vision and resilience of the late David J. Azrieli. As such, the mission of the Azrieli Foundation is to improve the lives of present and future generations through education, research, healthcare, and the arts in Canada and Israel. The foundation supports Holocaust education, music and the arts, scientific and medical research, higher education, youth empowerment, and school perseverance, architecture, and quality of life initiatives for the people with developmental disabilities. The Azrieli Foundation and the Azrieli family have a long history at Carleton. You only have to look around and you will see their name. Some of you may remember that Naomi Azrieli and the Foundation's exceptional Holocaust survivor memoirs and program were celebrated here with her parents at Carleton in 2013. Through its support of survivors in need, the training of the next generation of educators and scholars, its partnerships with organizations across Canada and around the world, and of course through its exemplary bilingual memoir program, the Azrieli Foundation is a true leader in Holocaust education and in assuring that the memory of those who perished and those who survived are never forgotten. We thank the Foundation for its friendship in making tonight's evening a reality. And thank you so much, Jeane Beker, for coming to join us.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. It gives me great pleasure to invite Jody Spiegel, Director of the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs Program at the Azrieli Foundation, to say a few words. But first, let me give you her glittering resume. She is our guest speaker tonight, and she's the director of the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs Program at the Azrieli Foundation. She attended Osgoode Hall Law School, and after a brief career in litigation, she joined the Azrieli Foundation. So their loss is our gain. Hard at its inception, Jody helped the foundation launch several exceptional projects, including the International Azrieli Fellows Program and the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs Program. In her current role, Jody has managed the publication of 80 memoirs. Among them, 15 are award-winning. She is the executive producer of the Azrieli series of short films, which features stories and animated excerpts from memoirs written by Canadian Holocaust survivors. Across Canada and internationally, Jody is a frequent guest speaker and panelist on the role of storytelling, survivor memoir, and the future of Holocaust education. She is a Canadian delegate of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. She lives in Toronto with her husband and 2 children. We are honored to have you tonight. Jody.
So I thought you were only going to take like a line from the whole bio. I didn't expect any of that, but thank you. So on behalf of the Azrieli Foundation and the Azrieli family, I'm truly honored to be here tonight. Special thank you to everyone at Carleton, to Deidre Butler, and to the Center for Holocaust and Education Scholarship, especially the incredible Mina, oh, there you are. Hi. She's amazing. She's just a little ball of energy and puts her heart into everything that she does. So it's a pleasure to be here. The Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program was established by the Azrieli Foundation in 2005 to collect, preserve, and share the memoirs and diaries written by Holocaust survivors who came to Canada after the war. The program is guided by the conviction that these stories have an important role to play in education about tolerance and diversity, but that each one of these stories are unique and special and must be shared. There's actually a Hasidic Jewish thought that when you tell a story, that in and of itself can save the world. The simple act of telling a story saves the world. Perhaps the power of storytelling is that by sharing a story, you can actually save the memory of a person and keeping the memory alive, so you prevent what some call a second death, the death that comes after the physical one, when an event or a person is forgotten. The simple act of sharing a story. That's why I believe the work that we do is so important. We make the stories, the books, free of charge across the country, available in French and English, free to schools and universities. And we work with educators to help bring them into the classroom and connect students to our memoirs, because our survivors are not going to be around forever. Each story allows readers to put a face on what was lost and to grasp the enormity of what happened to 6 million, one story at a time. In her keynote address to the UN, a Nigerian author, I just finished her book, her name is Chimamanda Adichie. She wrote this book, Americana. She said, "Nobody is ever just a refugee. Nobody's ever a single thing. And yet when we think of people, we think of them as single things, immigrants, refugees." David Azrieli was a refugee and an immigrant. But to Adichie's point, he was much more, a businessman, a Holocaust survivor, a teacher, a philanthropist. But the reason I'm here today is he was an author. And the initial motivation behind the program was that David Azrieli had enormous difficulty in facing his memories. He struggled to write them down, and when he finally did, he actually wanted other people to experience the process and make that happen, because as David Azrieli, whose name is on towers in Israel, Yad Vashem had no problem publishing his memoir. But for some people, their names aren't on buildings, and their stories are in drawers or saved on floppy disks, which we still get in. So we wanted to make that a reality. So since 2005, we've published over 80 survivor memoirs, and we still have over 100 more to go. And we're still collecting manuscripts and diaries, but the sitting and the writing right after the war or years later is difficult. And that is the starting point of our program, acknowledging that sharing your story can be complex and sometimes an overwhelming challenge. When we started the publishing program 13 years ago, the responses were occasionally mixed, not about what we were doing or the importance of the work that we were doing, but the assumption that this must be so hard and depressing. But it isn't. It really isn't. The stories are difficult and always emotional and challenging, but they're filled with hope and with resilience and with courage and with sometimes humor. And this is perhaps no truer than in Bronya and Joseph Beker's memoir, Joy Runs Deeper. The Beker's youngest daughter, Jeane, writes in the introduction to her parents' memoir that beyond all lessons to be learned from her parents' extraordinary lives, it is their recounting of shtetl life and the time gone by that will leave a lasting legacy. She credits their storytelling as being a part and parcel responsible for who she is today, and that their stories of toughness and tenacity, and I would add humor and honesty, teach those of us who read them the kind of heroic fearlessness that it took to survive. Bronya and Joseph's book is an inspiring love story, one of incredible courage. Their family's journey from shtetl and poverty to Jeane becoming a media icon in this country is a remarkable Canadian success story. I'm thrilled that Jeane Beker is here tonight to talk about it. Please welcome to the podium, stage, author, broadcaster, fashion icon, but most notably, Bronya and Joseph's daughter, Jeane Beker.
Hi, I am so thrilled to be here and so happy that you all chose to come out tonight to share in this incredible event. The Azrieli Foundation has been kind of a godsend to me and my family, which is kind of small, but our parents, for my sister and I, we were the only kids in the family, and then I've got 2 daughters. My parents were just incredible people. And to think that this was such a dream for my mom especially, to one day, have a book published. And, we thought, yeah, right, Mom, like he's going to publish your book. And I remember back in the 60s, she had a portable typewriter, one of those little and she'd bang out the, English was not certainly her first language, although she was pretty good at it, lovely accent. But she wrote in her own words this wonderful, 50 or 60 page manuscript, and she always just had it in the drawer, ready to share it with anyone who wanted to read it. And then my dad, it really unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize a few years before he passed away, and he died in 1988, he wrote his memoirs longhand in Yiddish, because his English wasn't really very good at all, and he didn't know how to type. We found those notes after his death, and my mother brought them and her manuscript to the attention of the Azrieli Foundation. I don't even know how that happened. I think something through the synagogue, she found out there was this great foundation that published works, and she brought these manuscripts and they accepted them, and the next thing I know, I was getting a call saying, we've decided to publish your parents' manuscripts. I was like, wow. It was, and thank God the book came out in the fall of 2014, just about 6 months before my mom passed away, so she lived to see it. And I was at that book launch with her, and I sat there as she insisted on signing every single book. And there was like a lineup, a huge, long lineup of high school kids who came out to the book launch. And of course, that's really who we want to get these stories out to. You too, of course. But it's that generation. And I was just so proud of my mom, and she was just so proud of herself. It was just, it was incredible. Anyway, it gives me deep personal joy to be able to share this little excerpt from the book, a little edited excerpt that really will show to you, some of the humor and some of the warm memories that they had of shtetl life in pre-war Poland, and then of course the horror that transpired during the war years. On July the 21st, a beautiful sunny day in 1944, I found myself sitting in the ruins of our house, crying bitterly. The little town of Kosovo, where I was born on December the 9th, 1920, had been destroyed. After I could cry no more, I just sat there thinking and dreaming, watching my life pass before me. In my mind, Kosovo came to life in front of my eyes like an oasis in the middle of a desert. There were so many types of people in Kosovo that I could write a whole book just trying to describe them. And nobody was called by his or her real name. Everyone had a nickname. For instance, next door to us lived the shoichet, the ritual slaughterer. His name was Ben Sion, so his wife was called Ben Zinachi. What a character she was. If she stuffed a chicken's neck and sewed it up, she would leave the needle inside. When she went to the store, she would buy each item separately because she couldn't remember 2 things at once. Across from us lived tall, skinny Lipatsal Abers and his humpbacked cousin Hindela. When Lipatsal Ebers said Kiddush on a Friday night, it was so loud that the whole town could hear him. Hindela, neatly dressed in a long dress, apron, and white kerchief, walked like a duck and looked like a penguin. Hindela had a very ugly black cat. When I asked her why she didn't own a nicer looking cat, she answered that an ugly cat no one would ever want to steal from her. Shruel Lieb and his family lived next to them. He was a plain man, a butcher who had many children. When the children were young, the family was poor. There were times when they only had a small piece of bread in the house. That was when their mother told them, "Children, if I give each of you a small piece of bread, you won't have enough. But if I eat it all, you'll have a beautiful mother." And she did eat it, and she was beautiful. In the middle of town stood a big white house owned by Gittel de Breiteke, the Wide. Gittel was a large woman with red hair tied in a bun at the back of her head, a face full of freckles, wide hips, and stocky legs. One time, a tiny man, Zishala, wandered into our town. As soon as Zishala saw Gittel de Breiteke, he fell in love with her. Zishala was a funny-looking man with red hair and a little red beard. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too big for him and a pair of high boots with turned-up points. He walked quickly with small steps and stuttered when he talked. What a couple they made. You could have built a whole Zishala from just one of Gittel's legs. All the people in town were like one big family. The ones that were a little better off gave meals and clothing to the less fortunate ones. Despite everything, we helped one another in times of need. When there was talk of war, I didn't fully realize what a war meant. Naively, I thought that finally we would have some excitement in our town. Soldiers would come and go. I was anxious to see what would happen. Then the situation grew serious. At the beginning of July 1941, German soldiers arrived in our town. Everybody started to build bunkers and hidden locations around town, and whenever we saw the Germans, we all hid. In April of 1943, a few days before Passover, the Germans surrounded the ghetto. On that day in April, 10 of us went down to the bunker. Me, my father and sister, my half-brother and his 2 daughters, and my sister-in-law and her 3 children. After about 6 hours, we heard heavy boots running down the steps to our cellar. They were looking for us, digging. We held our breath, and we didn't move for about a half an hour, but the pipes through which we got our air must have gotten covered during all their digging. We couldn't breathe. I remember seeing my father on the floor in his prayer shawl praying, and my brother with a hammer in his hand trying to open the entrance to the bunker. And then I fell down, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I saw many people around a bed in which I was lying. My cousin Scylla was beside me. The first thing I asked was, "Where's my sister, Sarah?" When I saw the looks on their faces, I understood that she was gone. Everybody in that bunker, except for me, all 9 of them, had suffocated. I was alone. I became wild with grief. When the doctor tried to give me an injection to calm me down, I grabbed him by the throat, wanting to kill him for bringing me back to life. I had felt so peaceful while sleeping, and it seemed to me that I had been woken from a good, sound sleep to face a dreadful life, alone and terrified. When Yosho came into my room, he was stunned. I will never forget the look on his face. He couldn't believe that I was alive. I couldn't understand it myself. I believe it was fate. From then on, Yoso took care of me. I would never have survived on my own, and I didn't care at all. On that horrible April day, it felt as though I had lost everybody. Only Yoso had survived. It was a horrible experience lying there in bed, wanting to die, to go to sleep and not wake up. But Yoso wanted me to live. So I did. Life was unbearable, but I thought, I can't keep crying and being a burden to Yoso, so I told myself that I was away from home on a vacation and I would soon be together with my family. Really, I saw no way out, no way of living through that hell. But Yoso could get out of the worst situations, and he never gave up. And so from then on, my parents ran and hid, depending on the kindness of strangers, and somehow miraculously survived the war.
So what was it like to read your mother's words?
Well, you know, what was it always like? It's almost as though I think I channel her, you know, when I read it. It's not even, I don't even think it's coming out of me. It's coming from such a deep place. I really hear her voice in my head so loudly and so profoundly as I heard her telling these exact stories time and time again when I was little growing up, like just incessantly. You know, back in those days, there was really a stigma to going to a shrink, or, you know, you didn't normally, you know, want to go to get help, psychological help, which I'm sure like every Holocaust survivor would have needed in spades. And my parents didn't really have, you know, that many friends to talk to. I mean, they maybe had a few, you know, fellow survivors that they would socialize with, but it was my sister and I that became the listeners, you know, and I think it was very therapeutic for them. Of course, you know, as you know, so many Holocaust survivors just shut down. They don't want to talk about it at all. But my parents, as a form of therapy, I think just talked about it, so.
You've mentioned before in interviews about hiding, and Minna quoted you about hiding and not wanting to hear anymore. Actually, I'm going to get up and show a clip actually of your mother.
But I find that after all those years, it's a little bit easier to talk about, because I thought about it for such a long time. You know, I still keep reliving it and thinking about it. So it's not as, I really expected it to be worse when I talked about it than it is. Because maybe I don't know, I don't feel anymore or something. I got hardened. We talk between ourselves with my husband a lot about it because we lived through it together. And we talk to our brother-in-law, you know, my husband's brother. We talk about it. He keeps pumping us and asking questions because he was in Russia all those years. So it became like a routine already with me, so I talk about it. So I try not to feel that much, because it does upset you. It's not so easy. They start to talk about grandparents. My children now looked at me. They have no grandparents. They never had any grandparents. I used to talk a lot, but they used to get upset with me. He said, "That's all you can talk about? We don't want to hear anymore." You know, it was too much for them. They were too young to absorb all that, and it was sort of scary. But I figured they have to know, and I was a nervous wreck. I feel that my children inherit that a lot. Because, you know, you get upset, and you get nervous, and you can't control it, and then you blow up at any little thing. But after all those years go by, somehow you mellow or something, I don't know. We just learn to accept it. We know that's how it was, and that's how it is, and I can't make myself sick over it anymore because it's no use.
Jeannie.
I haven't heard my mom's voice in a long time. So thank you for that, though.
Well,
thank you for that.
She was.
I mean, I hear her voice constantly in my head, but you know what I mean.
She was an avid speaker and outgoing, and and was very busy making sure that people knew her story. And she'd be very proud of you for all that you've done to share her story and take it forward, really. Talk about what it was like to be a child of Holocaust survivors.
You know, it's funny because now, of everything in my life, I think it's the thing I'm the most proud of. But when I was little, it was kind of creepy. You know, I mean, I didn't think it was something to be proud of. I thought, oh, my parents, you know, came from this horrible place where this horrible thing happened, and they didn't, you know, they didn't have any support, and they, you know, and then everything was taken from them. Their youth was just like nipped in the bud, and they never got a chance to realize, you know, any of their dreams or any of their aspirations, really. And my mother always talked about, you know, how if she would have been born in, you know, in North America, she would have been a lawyer, and, you know, my father would have been some big, you know, business magnate, and they had the talent, they had the potential. They had so much going for them. They're such incredibly vibrant, intelligent, sensitive, beautiful people. But, you know, obviously that, you know, fate was just, you know, against them, and they never got a chance to live out any of those dreams. So then I always thought, well, okay, my parents, you know, and you know, as a kid, I don't know, I was kind of embarrassed that they had accents, or embarrassed that they were so world weary, or that they were nervous wrecks, because, you know, especially my mom, really, she kind of was. But I don't know, you know, the great thing is that as I got older, I started to realize that I have a real responsibility to these incredible people, because I was born in Canada and I had this incredible support, and it was up to me to not just live, you know, a good life or a great life, but I would have to live a fantabulous life so my parents could kind of live vicariously through me, so I could realize some of those dreams that they never had a chance to. And so that's why I just went for it, you know, and my father's work ethic was so phenomenal. I mean, he was always very adamant about being his own boss, being in business for himself, and they came here penniless, like with absolutely nothing, just off the boat, well, with a few, you know, prized possessions and a little wooden trunk that's now on display at the Museum of Immigration in Halifax. But they really didn't have anything, and they didn't really have many contacts here. And, you know, again, as I say, they didn't speak the language, but my father managed to cultivate a little business for himself after a few years. And he actually bought a house. I mean, we could only live in 2 rooms of the house. He had to rent out, you know, all the other rooms to help subsidize the payments for the mortgage. But it was great, because all of a sudden I have this extended family. There are all these, like, we call them the roomers. Like, the roomers were there, you know, and there were people from Germany, and there were people from England, and there were kids, and there were all kinds of different people in the house, and the house just felt very lively and wonderful. I thought, oh, I had the sense of belonging, and my sister and I and my parents, you know, just lived in 2 rooms on the main floor, but we had all these other people coming and going, and you know, it was really great. But my dad started this little slipper factory. How he got into that is a whole other story. But, you know, and he worked 7 days, I kid you not, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. 7 in the morning till 7 at night, Monday through Sunday. Sometimes on a Saturday afternoon he'd take off, because I would go down there after my piano lessons to meet him at his factory, and we would go to Kensington Market, which is the big Jewish market at the time. It's now something quite different, but at the time, you know, where you'd buy, you know, like the big live carp, you know, the fish. You know, so we would bring home a live fish. I'd put it in the bathtub. I'd have a pet for a few days till they kill it to make a filter fish for, you know, Friday night, the next Friday night dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a great life-death lesson. But anyway, yeah, that was my pet fish. Frank Gehry, actually, you know, the great architect, Frank Gehry, talked to me about that once too. And you know how all his buildings, like in Bilbao, and they all look like fish kind of. They've got this really great organic curvy feel because he grew up with a fish in his bathtub too.
So that's, it's funny.
Don't ask how he took a bath with that fish in there.
So I looked into this because my father also told stories about fish in the bathtub. There's actually a children's book called The Carp in a Bathtub.
Oh.
And I thought it was because, yes, they wanted fresh fish, but also carp are bottom feeders, I heard. So they have to swim in fresh water to clean out before you would. I had no idea. Right? So it's a cooking lesson and a discussion about the memoir. Your father's personality is so strong in his memoir. He was the only man in town with a horse. Then he was the only man in town with a wagon. Like he was, you're right. Like had he been born at different times, he would have been the top in the business wherever he was. And he pushed that forward, and you see that like it was all about it's, I don't know if it was male female dynamic or the way the the memoirs are written, but Brunya's story is she wrote it years later, but she wrote it the way she spoke about it, and she sort of goes back and you can hear the child in the story and how she felt at the words you read, right? How she saw her town, and then how she felt about surviving, and her love for meeting her husband. But your father's story, she's barely mentioned. It's his initiative, it's his doing, and it's amazing. And I wonder if that sort of tenacity to move forward, and what they thought of your success. What did your parents think about being the parents of Jeane Beker,
Well, they were my number one publicists, and they were just like, my father would go into the bank. He always had a little picture of me in his wallet, and he'd go into the bank. I moved back. My career started really taking off in media anyway in 1975 in Newfoundland, and I was working at the CBC radio for 3 years there. And in 1975 to 78. 78, I moved back to Toronto, got a job with a top 40 radio station, Chum, and then they bought a TV station, City TV, and then I got my own TV show, and so that's when my career really started popping. And my dad was so proud of that, and he would go into the bank with, and he'd show the bank teller. Do you know who this is? That's my daughter. One of those. My mother was just like, she used to say, "Oh, Jeannie, I'm just busting with pride." They were very, 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 very proud of me, and sometimes I think, I know it deep down inside that they were without question the biggest incentive for me to go out there and just go out there and do it and live this big life and work like a dog, because that's what my dad did. And without question, they were incredibly proud. And and I know now how much prouder would they even be to be here tonight, like to see me, talking about them and telling their stories. So they fueled my fires for sure. I mean, my dad was incredibly tenacious. I mean, that whole, his motto was always, don't be afraid and never give up, right? That's what got them through the war, because they were on the run the whole time. They were hiding the whole time. So imagine, the fear. And my mother, of course, as you heard, was just ready to give up, when she realized that everyone, in her family had perished. But my dad was, no, we have to be fearless and we have to be tenacious, and we're going to get through this thing. So, that motto plays over in my head time and time again, no matter what I'm going through. I mean, I remember, being at the collections in Paris, running around backstage trying to get a 5-second soundbite from Karl Lagerfeld, and I'd be hearing my dad's voice in my head, don't be afraid and never give up, elbowing my way through the crowds to just try and, go up to the biggest celebrity in the front row and just to have the nerve to ask him a question. Like, it just fed everything, and when my marriage broke up in 1998, I was devastated, really had to be scraped off the floor because I didn't see it coming. And I had these, my kids were 8 and 10, and my husband just one day picked up and left. Seriously, I thought I was going to kill myself, but then again, it was I heard my dad in my head. He'd been dead 10 years by that point, but I still, remembered his motto: do not be afraid and do not give up. No matter what, do not give up. And I kept thinking, if my parents got through that, I could get through this. I mean, I could get through anything. So, what a wonderful way to really grow up, and what a wonderful lesson to learn.
And your father was very positive and forward-thinking, but your mother had a motto, and it was expect the worst and you won't be disappointed.
Yeah,
Right.
I know. Which is, see, she was so protective of us. She never wanted us to suffer or be hurt. I remember she was always telling me, yeah, life is full of disappointments. Like, life is full of disappointments. Okay, there are a lot of disappointments in life. There's also a lot of great stuff. I mean, but my mom just wanted to, for us to be prepared, that we wouldn't get our hopes up too high for anything. Don't get your hopes up for anything, because, that's what happened to her. She thought she was living this perfect, idyllic existence, and then, and then one day her entire world came crashing down. So, yeah.
You have 2 amazing daughters. What do you think they would say your motto is?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, thanks.
That's a good one.
Gonna have some water. What do you think about that?
Yeah, boy. Oh, what would my... God, I'd like to phone them right now and ask them. Let's get them on the line.
Well, actually, no, I don't have
No, I would think, blaze your own trails. Yet they do it, and it drives me crazy.
Right.
I've got my youngest daughter lives in a log cabin in the Yukon, off the grid. No electricity, no running water, by herself. She has a dog. She's gorgeous. She's like 28 years old, singer-songwriter. She's a musician, but she went to the Yukon 5 years ago to go to an art school. I thought, okay, it'll be a good experience. She'll come back in a year. She didn't. Mom, I fell in love with the community. I love it here. I don't want, and it's like, oi. So, I told her to be fearless, but not that fearless. Right? And my other daughter, again, a joy, a gorgeous, beautiful human being, Becky, who she's turned 31, and she is living on my farm. I bought a farm when my ex-husband left. I had to do something enormous on my own, so I bought a 123-acre farm. I'm farmer, hear me roar. And that's a place where I could go with the kids, in between my crazy trips around the world. And a couple of years ago, my daughter and her husband said, you know what, Mom, we'd love to live at the farm full time. Like when they finished, they're animators, and they finished their animation studies at Concordia University, and they asked if they could live at the farm. And I thought, well, okay, great. Then I thought, but that farmhouse is teeny tiny. I guess that means I'm going to have to find another place. Which I did, happily, But my daughter lives and not only do they have an animation studio in the shed at the barn, but they're also actually organic farmers, and they have about 15 ducks, like Indian runner ducks that, great, if you just follow them on Instagram, it's called Cardboard Reality Farm. And she's at the farmer's market every few days, selling what they grow at the farm and selling the duck eggs, and just they're living the dream, But again, they're blazing their own trails. I mean, I never wanted my kids to follow in my footsteps. I mean, I just thought that was not original enough, I thought, think outside the box and go for it, but, in your own way. And being original.
Joey was named after your father.
Joey. Sarah Jo. She was actually named after my mother's sister who perished, Sarah, and Joseph Yosho, as my mother used to call him, Yosho. Sarah Jo, Joey. Joey was born in 1989, a year after my dad passed, so he never got to meet her. But Becky was 8 months old when my dad died, so at least he lived to see a grandchild. My sister never had any children, so I was glad that I could kind of do that for him.
I think you've given your parents so much joy. In your memoir, you wrote about going back in 1995 to Poland for the first time with your mother. What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing. Well, listen, my mother always was, let's go back to Kosovo. I want to go back to Kosovo. My sister and I were like, we don't want to go anywhere near that place. I know it sounds horrible and selfish now in some ways, but I did not. Also, I was worried because my mother's friends, some of them had gone back to their former shtetls, and one of them saw the tombstones from the Jewish cemetery had been used to pave the sidewalks after the war. I thought, if my mom went back to this place that, she had loved so much and she had all these idyllic, gorgeous memories of, if she went back and saw something like that, I think she would have just flipped out. So I didn't want her to see it. I thought it's best that she remembers Kosovo as that town that it was. But fashion television had been on the air for several years at that point, and it was sold to a Polish TV station legally. Apparently, fashion television had been on, it had been pirated in Poland for many years. So I was already a celebrity in Poland without knowing it. But, so the guy officially decided to start paying for the show. So they said, you should come to Poland and, with your producer. And I thought, and I'm going to bring my mother, because this is a chance to go back to Poland. And my mother can act as our translator because she spoke just beautifully in Polish. So we went back to Poland, and the guy that that owned the TV station was very sensitive to it. We arrived at the airport, and he knew that I was bringing my dear mom with me, and who had gone through such hell in Poland during the war years, and they greeted us at the airport with all these gorgeous girls, like these models, dressed in these fabulous little fitted suits, and they all had huge bouquets of flowers, and we were like, wow. My mother was like, she felt like Madonna. It was incredible. Like, we were like rock stars in Warsaw, and anyway, Kosovo, the little town that my parents were from, after the war, it became Ukraine, so it's not even in Poland anymore. So my mother had never been to Warsaw. As a young girl, she always dreamed of going to the big city, going to Warsaw, but I think the farthest she ever went was Tarnopol or something. She'd never made it all the way to Warsaw. So she was like, wow, we stayed at the Bristol Hotel, which was like the ritziest place, and so I remember, this was incredible. First of all, the first place we went, the big Mercedes limos that picked us up from the airport took us to the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, which was incredible. And my mom and I got to lay a wreath there. That was so moving. That was so touching. But what was really amazing after that, I just lost my train of thought. I had a press conference to meet all the media that was so excited that fashion television was, had come to Poland finally, officially, and I was there. And so we had this incredible press conference in this old abandoned palace. And I, at the beginning of the press conference, said, isn't it great? I'm so thrilled to be here. And I want you all to know that I've brought my mother with me. My mother, who actually survived the war in Poland. She's a Holocaust survivor. And all of a sudden, every single member of the press in that room couldn't care less about me. They all turned to my mother and started asking my mother questions. What was Poland like? And my mother, who was like speaking Polish so beautifully, had a little speech that she had written in her purse. And she pulled out a speech, and she made her speech, and she was so proud. And then she ended up on the 6 o'clock news. Right. Nothing, not a word about fashion television, but my mother became the big news story in Warsaw that night. It was like, what a fantasy. What a fantasy.
I think that I feel like that was sort of like the spark, like the turning of the tables for you, almost in a way. I don't know if you would say that, but that at that point, your mom was always a speaker. You heard the stories. You hid. You didn't want to hear it anymore. But I don't know. Or was it seeing it in print?
Well, without question, Jody, and I did. I think even maybe mention this in in my memoir that I had never been so proud as I was of my mom that night. Like, I'd never ever been so proud of her. I mean, to see her in her element, to see her speaking her, her first language. I mean, it was incredibly joyful. And to think that because of my crazy job as a fashion journalist, I had somehow managed to bring her back to Poland. You've got to believe in miracles. You've got to believe in the magic of life and serendipity and all that. I mean, I think if you don't, you must lead a pretty dreary existence. But that, to me, was just a sign that, yeah, the way the universe has a way of, delivering what's needed. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful story, really.
Oh, like you were saying, I remember at the book launch, we were talking about this earlier, your mother, who wasn't well at the time, we weren't sure if she was going to read, you did the reading, but she had a spark, she always had a sparkle in her eye, but she was on that night at the event, she was there, and at one point, I was mentioning this earlier, Jeannie was practicing her excerpt that she was going to share at the book launch. She was asking her mom, "Mom, is this how you pronounce this word? And is this the right way to say it?" And Branya was responding, but she, wasn't 100% well. There was a bit of dementia happening. And at one point, she just turned to Jeannie and went, "This is my book." And she's like, I know, Mom. I know. She goes, "No, it's my book. Like, sit down. This is my time." It was pretty amazing. And I feel like you've really done your parents such beautiful justice and carrying on their legacy. What do you think the legacy in terms of the next generation and what you hope that this book leaves with people and students and your children? How did they feel about reading it?
Well, my kids are, because my mother was adamant about telling them these stories too. But by that time, by that point, it had all softened a lot. And I don't think they got into the grit. And, my dad was gone by that point. So we couldn't hear the stories from his point of view anymore, pardon me. But certainly my mother, she had this fairy tale way of the characters that she described. I mean, just like, it was like a fantasy. It was like truly a fairy tale. Like my daughter is, was working and will continue working on an animated film about my mother's life and my father's life in pre-war Poland and their little shtetl. And she's, like I said, she's an animator and she's also a puppeteer. And she's built these puppets, they're like about this big, that are like the characters and the way they're dressed. Like every character that I described up there in my mom's words, she has built those actual characters and they're gonna come to life one day. And it's mind-blowing.
It's like little gefilte fish, right?
Yeah, I helped her make that gefilte fish out of what do they call it, Fimo or something. Right. We did that, we've got all the props ready. She just basically has to shoot it, and she will. She's got a few other things going on. The ducks are hatching this week. It's very exciting. New ducklings are coming. I don't have grandkids, but I have grand ducks. But my kids appreciated my mother so much. They loved her so much. And she left them with so much because she was so adamant about telling all those great stories to them. But, to anyone, why it's important for me to tell these stories, why it's important to keep this alive. It's not so much, like the ego thing of these are my parents and weren't they cool and weren't they, yes, of course they were cool and they were great, but it's a portrait to me of the human condition. It's a portrait of a time in history that was so dark that you never could imagine how anyone could have ever lived through it, how anyone could have ever escaped it. Yet as your foundation's work is testament to the fact that, yes, many people did escape it, far more perished, but there was a precious flock of people that really did escape it, and not only went on to survive, but to thrive and lead these incredibly inspiring lives, and then have children that became super achievers. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of, and believe me, we are all traumatized by the Holocaust, as my kids are even traumatized by having heard those stories. This is stuff that gets into your DNA. I mean, I don't think of it, I see the world like, someone who hasn't been affected this way. I mean, of course, there's just it was so profound what that experience did to people. It's just it's incredible. So I think at best, I just hope that these stories, all these incredible stories that all your beautiful survivors have told, but also that these stories that my parents have to tell will make us all realize just, you know, how profoundly deep human beings can sink, yet how profoundly high they can soar. I mean, it's just all about the resilience and the triumph of the human spirit in the end. And what a wonderfully optimistic, positive note that is to carry on through the generations. I think, you know, anyone, you know, looking back at this time in history, if they hear, you know, the positive outcomes of you know, some of these survivors and how they did manage to turn their lives around by just putting one foot in front of the other, you know, just don't stop too long, don't think about it, just keep going. So no matter what's going on in your life, and everybody's got their own personal kind of Holocaust. I mean, I thought of it was when my husband left me. That was it for me. I mean, God forbid, I hope, you know, nothing worse ever happens to me. But at that time, I thought, oh, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. You know, no, so it's like just look forward, just keep going. You can't dwell too much in the past. You got to remember it. You know, you got to look back every once in a while, and you got to remember what happened, but just keep focused on the future.
And I think in a few minutes we're going to open it up to questions to the audience. But before I go there, I just want to end with one discussion. I know that I'm not going to get into the discussion around Canada Reads, but I know that for the Canada Reads, Jeane defended a book for Canada Reads 2018 and was the winner. And the book Forgiveness is about, it has World War II themes, and it's an amazing book. So I'm not going to get into what it's about, but and you defended it so beautifully.
Well, because
that I went
it
out to read it.
resonated so profoundly with me.
Right,
because,
and you mentioned that in addition to the themes in the book of forgiveness, it's about healing.
Yes.
And before we have the power to go on and grapple with the larger picture, we have to heal and forgive. Did you have to heal? And did your parents take the time to heal? Like, talk to me about the idea of forgiveness.
Well, you know, yeah, I can't talk that much about my parents' interior lives. Obviously, that's something very personal. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know what they told me. They led by example. I saw the way they picked up the pieces, and I saw the way they marched forward. I don't know exactly what their inner process was, but the fact that I knew that my parents did not really dwell on any of that bitterness that obviously they felt, you know, and there were times, you know, when I think if they really, you know, went there, if they really concentrated on it, it would have just stopped them in their tracks. But I think they chose at the end of it all to see the good in people. Like, they loved people. My father was always cautious, you know, and as any good businessman must be. My mother was quite trusting of people, and always taught us that, you know, with an open heart, you can achieve anything, and with honesty and with an open mind. I mean, and I think they were, you know, as their lives, you know, went on, and they certainly mellowed with age, as we all do. They really did see the world through that lens of forgiveness. And I'm not saying that they would ever forgive the Nazis or Hitler or any of that, but I think they chose to see the good in human nature rather than the bad, or at least chose to concentrate on the good and try to, you know, block out the bad.
Thank you, Jeane and Jody. One of the things that you said that resonates with me is the idea that your parents were so strong that they probably kept some of their own trauma inside. They shared with you stories to remember, so you would remember their history, but they did not want you to experience their pain. That moved me because I think back about my mother. 2 years ago, our family was approached to become the template for the New Heritage Minute about the Vietnamese boat people.
Oh.
And up until that point, even though my mother would tell us stories, she kept so much hidden. And the one thing that she did tell when I asked her for more information about our history was she says, "Oh, for 10 years, I did not sleep because I had nightmares." I said, "Mom, what are you talking about? What kind of nightmares?" And she said that when we sunk the boat so that they couldn't so the Malaysian government couldn't tow us back to sea, you had to jump into the ocean and swim to shore, but your dad was in the water, but you wouldn't go. So I had to go to the edge, grab you, and throw you overboard. And I had nightmares about that for a decade.
Wow.
And part of me wonders, it is a blessing for us to have parents who have experienced this, who protect us, but who also provide the light in the darkness so that we could succeed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Really unbelievable. My mom's here today. See this little ring that I wear? My mother's brother, who was subsequently shot in the forest, that was one of the brothers that wasn't down in the bunker with them, gave this to my mother the day the war broke out. He gave her this ring in 1939, and this is the only thing that survived the war, the only thing that survived the whole war with her, this little ring. So, just saying, I had to show it off because I feel she's here. They're both here.
Can you speak to us about either the relationship you have with your sister, and what does your sister do in terms of keeping the story vibrant? If it's not appropriate,
that's an excellent, very, very excellent question. You see, my sister, she hates me revealing her age, but whatever. Don't tell anyone. No, my sister was born in a DP camp, like in 1945, right after the war. My mother, when they were finally liberated, and my mother was like, wanting to, shoot herself because she said, "I lived through all this for this. Like we have nothing. Like nobody's left. Nobody's here." And my dad's like, "No, we're gonna have a child, and that's gonna be the thing that's gonna save us, and that's going to be the thing that you're going to live for. You're going to live for this child." So my sister was born, and they lived in this DP camp in Austria, Bindermichel in Linz, Austria, for 3 years, waiting to come to Canada. And my sister was my mother's world, like totally her world. So you can understand that puts. And although I was incredibly important to my mother too, but that puts an incredible amount of pressure on someone, especially as a little child. My mother's always, saying to her and said to her, my sister was 7 by the time I was born, so she was already, and my mother always telling her, "You're the reason I'm living. You're the reason it's you, and I think that totally freaked my sister out a bit in some ways. I also think how hard it was for my sister. I mean, I was born, during like this wonderful time. By the time I was born in 1952, my parents had just bought this house, this rooming house. My father had started his little slipper factory. My mother could stop working because she was working on a pant factory for like $12 a week or something. But when my parents came to Canada, when they landed here, and they took a train, I guess, from Halifax to Toronto, and they had to immediately go to work, they had to dump my sister, I shouldn't say dump, but put my sister in a nursery school where she couldn't speak a word of English. I mean, my sister spoke Polish and maybe a little German from living in this, like a 3-year-old. She had no way of, and my mother all of a sudden, my sister was like the center of my mother's world, but all of a sudden my mother was off working for $12 a week, and they didn't see her all day. And I remember my mother saying she felt so guilty for having to do that to my sister. And she said she came once to pick her up from nursery school, and my sister's eyes were all just red, and she couldn't figure out what happened. And it's because my sister really wanted a carrot, which was called a marchewka. There was some Polish word for carrot, and she kept asking the teacher for a carrot, and the teacher didn't know what she was talking about. So you can imagine the frustration of this little kid that all of a sudden felt abandoned. So suffice it to say, my sister had a fair bit of trauma growing up. I mean, she survived, as we all survived, and she thrived. And my sister she's a professor at Loyola Marymount University. She lives in Los Angeles. She has a beautiful life. She's married to an incredible guy, and she's great. But I know my sister has always had a hard time talking about a lot of this stuff, much, 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 much more than me. She didn't come for my mother's book launch, and we had an opportunity for her to do some speaking, and it's not that she doesn't want to and that she didn't respect my parents and love them profoundly, but it's just hard for some people. It's just harder. But now, just very recently, my sister said she met a woman in LA, a professor at Loyola, actually, who is involved in Holocaust studies. And my sister went out for lunch with her. And this woman has invited my sister to go to some big conference that's taking place next fall in Florida or something. And my sister said, you know what? I think I'm going to go.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was so excited, I said, I'm going to go with you. And then I went, oh, no. You know what? Let her do that. Like, I want to get in on everything, the bratty kid sister.
Right.
I thought, no. You know what? No, she should go and do that. So I think she will maybe now start to get into it. It takes a long time to come to terms with stuff for some people. But yeah, thank you for asking that question. My sister was profoundly affected by it all.
I'm Esther Tarasovsky, and Jeannie, you didn't tell us what it was like when you and your mother actually went to the town where she was born.
No, we didn't go.
Oh, you didn't
No, I said
go.
we didn't want to go because, well, first of all, it's Ukraine now, it's not Poland. And we didn't want to go because I was afraid of how, I didn't want her to shatter, that idea that she had of her town, those memories. I was just too afraid that, we didn't end up going. And listen, do I feel a little guilty about never having taken her back there? Yes. And should I probably go back? I mean, I've traveled all over the world. Why wouldn't I just hop on a plane and go there now for myself? But maybe in some ways,
The Ukraine, I wouldn't go.
I don't want to ruin it for myself either.
And I did want to make one observation. Primo Levi, who was a real interpreter of the war and the experience subsequently, wrote in one of his books that he was on a train and he met a Nazi and he forgave him.
That's right.
And he talked about that as part of one's humanity.
But I was wondering what your parents taught you about anti-Semitism and in terms of their experience. Was it something that they talked to you about?
Yeah, of course. They talked to me about, growing up and how anti-Semitic a lot of the people in their village were. Obviously, that they would throw stones at them, or they would call them dirty Jew, or whatever. It was horrible. But they talked to me a whole lot about these wonderful Gentile people that really saved them during the war. So see, that's why when I talk about my parents looking at the world through the lens of forgiveness, there was anti-Semitism, and there is. It's a fact of life. I mean, there are rotten, terrible, horrible people in the world, but there are also some incredible people. And those are the stories that they dwelled on. My sister married a non-Jewish guy. My father was very not happy about it and did not attend the wedding. But then he grew to love him. And they had a wonderful relationship by the end of my father's life. So my parents weren't, they didn't see the world that way. It wasn't, anti-Semitism, and at its worst, it catastrophic and gave birth to the Holocaust, but it wasn't anything that they really talked a lot about. And I thank God, because, I would hate to have to look at the world that way.
Jeannie, I'm interested in trying to understand how you handled the situation with your children. Being a child of a survivor and having a young family as well, my son and daughter, who are the world for me, did they come to you to ask more about your parents' story, or was it you telling them?
Oh, it was my mother telling them.
Oh, you were lucky.
My mother was there from the, they were the tiniest babies, and they were hearing these stories. I don't think my mother at that point was really spoon feeding them, the stories of the horror and the darkness. But as they grew older, they really did get to know it and got to read. Like I say, she wrote her memoirs back in the 60s. So by the time they were like 12 years old or 14 years old, she gave them copies of the manuscript. So they had read, well before the book was published, they had read those stories.
And I picked up on what you said about DNA. It's in our DNA. And unfortunately, my mother passed away before my children had that wonderful opportunity. But we have binders upon binders of letters that were written from Leipzig to her, to her family.
Just give those to us also? That would be kind of good.
I can't part with these right now.
Photocopies.
Yes.
Photocopy
for
them.
sure. Mina knows all about this.
Yes.
And it's amazing, the history, but also the untold story. And I'm still trying to find out more about that. But it's in my DNA, and it's in my children's DNA. So it's a very important story, and I thank you for sharing this, difficult at times though it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not Jewish, neither is my wife, but my father was in the Norwegian resistance. And his best friend in the entire world, a man called Jeane Beker from Stavanger in Norway, his whole family was wiped out in Auschwitz in one day. And on his deathbed, my father's deathbed, 8 years ago, that was one of the people that he was talking about and he remembered the most. I think my wife and I were just in Berlin a few weeks ago, and we were deeply moved by the Holocaust memorial there, right near the Brandenburg Gate. And I must say, I grew up in Norway, not that many years after the occupation. And it was really, really interesting to see how modern Germany is not that Germany of that era. And thank heavens for that, and I take my hat off to them. My question, I guess, really, and maybe if, Jeannie, if you'd like to comment on this, I look at the world today, and I see in Poland, in Hungary, dare I say it, in the USA, in some aspects of the USA, it's the us against them. They're looking for the scapegoat. And you see, and I look at this and I say, oh my God, are we headed down in some of these parts of the world down that same road again? Because it's so easy, if you are in that dominant group to start, and you're disgruntled and you're unhappy, and then you point the finger at somebody else, oh, it's their fault, and they become the scapegoats. And I think it's very worrying in 2018. I'm not saying that we're going to be back to 1938, but I certainly hope not, and I wonder if you could comment on that.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a political person. I see what goes on in the world, and a lot of it really dismays me. As individuals, what can we do but teach our own children, right from wrong, and try to, build our own awareness and just, be the best people we can be. I can't sit there and, my small way of trying to stop that kind of thing is by raising awareness, by keeping these stories alive so that it should never happen again. But, what are you asking? Like, how do we, totally uproot evil from this world? I mean, it's part of humanity. I mean, for better or worse, that's just the way it is. I don't know. I don't know how we stop it. It just is a matter of trying to, teach our children to really rise up against, any bad stuff that they see going on. But Yeah, I really don't know how to answer that question. You know, it's sad. It's the way of the world, and these terrible things are going on. I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of racism and anti-Semitism and just people hating each other for no good reason at all. I don't know if we'll ever grow beyond that. You know, if there will ever really truly be a great new age of great spiritual awakening. I see certain things going on that really make me feel a lot better about the planet. I see a certain kind of awareness. I mean, I'd like to be an optimist and think that maybe the more we evolve, the further we spiritually evolve, the kinder we'll be and the more compassionate we'll be. But then every day you're just seeing like the most blatant acts of stupidity and ignorance. I don't know what to say about it. It might just be, that we're only human after all, sadly.
I feel like I just want to say that to maybe end also on a positive note, what Jeannie said about education is that at least internationally, I know that there's actually more of a consciousness about Holocaust awareness and education, especially in Europe. Maybe Poland right now is a bit of an issue, but in general, there is an awareness of the unprecedented nature of the Holocaust and the fact that it set the precedent for how we understood all future genocides. And that in Canada, we have, like Deidre actually, and many other amazing educators, there is a wave of teachers and academics interested in bringing this to their students. And the work, I'll just say that in the work that we do, just this past year, over 205,000 Canadian students have read a survivor memoir. And it's only been, and that's 2018. So we're talking about one term of the school year. So if the goal can really be a focus on education and bringing the history that could be, for some kids, it's the French Revolution, right? It's 70 years ago. It could be 170 years ago, 300 years ago. It doesn't matter. We're keeping it aware. We're keeping the fact that we're only a generation or so removed from our survivors that aware to our Canadian students. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Jeannie and Jody. And one thing, Jeannie, that you actually said during Canada Reads was in your defense of the book, you said, we might not be able to change the world, but a story like this can change minds. And I think that's why we keep on telling our stories. So thank you. All right. Mina Cohen. I would like to call Mina Cohen back up.
Although at the Center of Holocaust Education and Scholarship, we focus mainly on stories in the past, every once in a while, there is a special moment that makes those long ago stories touch us in the present. Tonight, Jeannie was one of those moments. Thank you. I want to thank Jeannie for sharing her family story and how it affected you with us and inspiring us to help make this world a better place to live in. To Jody, I do not have enough words to say thank you to you and to the Azrieli Foundation for the important work you're doing in preserving and sharing the survivor stories in Canada and in supporting Holocaust education. We share a conviction that each story plays an important role in education with regarding to acceptance and diversity. We recognize in the Azrieli Foundation a true partner, a partner who understands and supports the important work of our center, the work we are doing here in Ottawa. We are looking forward to continue to work with the Azrieli Foundation in the future. Thank you, Jody, for your unwavering support. On behalf of the center, I would like to present you with a small token we chose something that reflects our Jewish history, that helped shape our Jewish history in the past, and identified us for generations. It's a unique Haggadah for Passover, with a historical reference to evokes the Canadian Jewish experience. The Haggadah has been compiled by Richard Marceau of CIJA, General Counsel and Senior Political Advisor, and Rabbi Adam Shear of Congregation Shar HaShamayim in Montreal.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much. Thank you. So nice. So kind. Thank you.
This is so exciting.
It matches my shirt. It's so nice. Oh, cool.
Beautiful. Thank you.
As I mentioned before, the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship is supported entirely by dedicated volunteers and by donations. Every dollar donated to our center goes directly to developing educational programs. In today's world, with racism and anti-Semitism on the rise, and with eyewitnesses of the Holocaust dwindling, our work is more important than ever. We thank those of you who have been supporting us for the last 2.5 years, and encourage all of you to continue attend our events. Please check our website for details of how to donate and about future events and our work. Each donation to the center receives a tax receipt from Carleton University. There is also a donation box outside in the atrium for your convenience. Thank you for supporting Chess, and thank you for coming here today. Jody, I would invite you all, thank you Jody for being our MC. I would like to invite you all to join us in the atrium, and Jeane Beker is going to sign her books, and you can get a copy outside. Thank you.
Okay. I felt that.
Only if she's going to Yeah, this was a beautiful evening. Thank you so much for sharing your memories and all your stories. Every story is precious.
Thank you so much for coming. Take care.
So my family are Litvaks.
Oh, yeah, I heard about the Litvaks.
And the survivors live in New York.
Oh.
And she's 95. She's going to have her 95th birthday.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming tonight.